Coming up today on the UW Medicine Pulse podcast, we focus on sports cardiology at UW Medicine and find out about the condition that on average kills one seemingly healthy young athlete every 3 days.
Is this the leading cause of death in young athletes during sports and exercise?
We'll meet a woman who turned the grief over the loss of her son into a program that hopes to prevent a similar fate for other families.
We figured that if our family didn't know this happened and all of our kids were athletic, then there was lots of families who also didn't know this happened.
And we'll tell you how you can get involved in an interesting challenge being organized by a UW Medicine researcher that's ultimately all about saving lives.
This is the UW Medicine Pulse with Marty Reamer. Real-world stories of the discoveries being made at UW Medicine and the impact they're having on people here in the Pacific Northwest and around the world.
Basket all the time. A good pass to Hank Gathers.
It was Sunday, March 4th, 1990. The Loyola Marymount University Lions were fighting for a slot in that year's NCAA basketball tournament with a game against Portland State.
This is Gathers.
Loyola's strapping forward, 6'7" Hank Gathers had just subjected Portland to one of his trademark tomahawk dunks. As Gathers transitioned to the other end of the court, he suddenly collapsed. Trainers rushed to his side. Moments later, he stopped breathing, and by the time he was taken to the hospital, he was pronounced dead of sudden cardiac arrest. Hank Gathers was 23 years old.
Probably the most publicized sudden cardiac death in an elite athlete in the U.S. of all time. And from that triggered a cascade of events that led to national recommendations for heart screens and sports physicals.
Jonathan Drezner is a UW Medicine physician specializing in sports cardiology. First, let's clarify the difference here between sudden cardiac arrest and the condition that's commonly referred to as a heart attack.
Sudden cardiac arrest is when the electrical signal in the heart goes haywire. There's sort of a short circuit, and the chambers of the heart that typically pump blood to the rest of the body start to fibrillate or quiver. And when someone is in one of those lethal heart arrhythmias called sudden cardiac arrest, they will collapse and they will die unless appropriately treated, which is usually a timely shock from a defibrillator. Sudden cardiac arrest should be distinguished from a heart attack because they are different. A heart attack, or what's known in the medical community as a myocardial infarction, is when one of the arteries that supplies the working muscle in the heart, blood and oxygen, gets clogged. And it can get clogged with a cholesterol buildup. It can get clogged acutely with a cholesterol plaque rupture and a clot. And that's what we call a heart attack or myocardial infarction.
That's okay. They'll come right back at you. Don't worry about it. Here we go. That was fast.
Well, their second shot.
And while the death of basketball star Hank Gathers may have sparked the national discussion about sudden cardiac arrest in athletes, his death was somewhat atypical in that there were symptoms. Gathers had collapsed 2 years earlier during a game and was diagnosed with an abnormal heart rhythm. Most cases of sudden cardiac arrest in young people strike without any warning at all.
One of the major issues in prevention and screening is that the majority of individuals who have sudden cardiac arrest during sports don't have any warning symptoms, probably about 80% of them. And so they're generally silent conditions, so we have to do something, I think, that looks beneath the surface if we really want some additional reassurance that they're going to be okay. And so the model that's used in Europe and in our professional sporting organizations within the U.S. is to add an EKG to that history and physical. And with that EKG, we can diagnose or have the EKG suggest a problem in probably about 60% of the athletes who actually harbor one of these issues. And so it's not
that you couldn't otherwise
that we
do
couldn't
with
otherwise
with a questionnaire.
Exactly. So it's not a perfect test. There are still heart issues that an EKG will not diagnose or not suggest, but it really improves our ability to detect an athlete at risk.
Loved football. That was, to him, that was the only reason he thought he should go to school, was so he could play football. He had played in a varsity game the Friday night before, and he played in the JV game because they needed some extra players on Saturday. And his dad went to wake him up for practice on Sunday morning, and he had died in his sleep.
Nick Valenti was 16 years old. He had a condition known as hypertrophic cardiomyopathy, HCM, or an enlarged heart. With no symptoms and no indicators from his routine annual sports physicals, the Valenti family had no way of anticipating this tragedy. Nick's mother, Darla Valenti.
He was the youngest of my 4 children. All of my kids have been athletes. I'd been to a million parents groups, booster club meetings, different kinds of things, and we never knew this happened to kids. And then to find out afterwards that it happens to, it's the leading cause of death in exercising young athletes is something that was shocking to me, and that it happens as often as it does, and that people just don't know about it. We figured that if our family didn't know this happened and all of our kids were athletic, then there was lots of families who also didn't know this happened. So we decided in January of 2006 to start the foundation.
That foundation, inspired by Nick Valenti's death, is called the Nick of Time Foundation.
Their mission is basically to prevent sudden cardiac arrest from afflicting other young individuals. And they're doing that through multiple avenues. They're trying to raise awareness about heart issues in athletes. They're trying to train coaches in schools in CPR and make sure defibrillators are available to resuscitate athletes or young persons if they have a cardiac arrest. And they're also implementing advanced heart screening through their partnership with the University of Washington. And so my role with the Nick of Time is I've been their medical director for 6 or 7 years. And for the last 3 years, we have begun a youth heart screening program in the greater Seattle and sort of Puget Sound area. And what we do is we go out to a local high school about once a month.
How was your screening today?
Pretty good.
Have you ever had your heart looked at before like this?
Yeah, one time.
How old were you?
14 maybe.
Okay. Yeah, you should have it done every 2 years when, especially as you're growing through your teen years, just to make sure it gets checked correctly.
All right, thank you.
Thank you.
And at that school, we screen between 400 and 500 students or student athletes in a day.
We're just going to be doing a 12-lead EKG here.
Right.
Have you ever had one before?
No.
Okay. It's stickers on your chest and a couple on arms and legs. And then it's just relax and hang out because the machine does all the rest of the work, okay? So you can lay down. I'm going to enter a little bit of info.
All of the athletes get a personal sort of symptom history and family history. They get a physical exam. They get an EKG.
Go ahead and blow your breath out. Good. Hold right there. This is the left ventricle, main pumping chamber. You can see it squeeze in with each beat. Then breathe. And then we're on a short
We
axis.
have echocardiography or ultrasound of the heart on site if needed, and some of our cardiology colleagues guiding that. And all of the students who come through also get trained in CPR and how to use a defibrillator.
What's the first thing that you do when you see someone fall down?
You pat them on the chest, listen for breathing, and see if they're conscious.
Okay, and if they're not breathing?
Call 911 and get help.
And get an AED?
Yeah, get an AED.
Okay.
From there, they come out and they learn CPR. And they go to what we have is our CPR station. And we teach them every child hands-only CPR and how to use an AED. We think that's probably one of the most important stations at our screening.
Stand by. Preparing to shock.
We'll get back to this Nick of Time heart screening in just a moment. But first, we sent our producer Tina Knoll out on the streets of Seattle to find out just how aware the public is of AEDs.
What is an AED?
Hold on, I know it, so don't tell me.
I've heard of the acronym.
Auto something, but it's not immune.
I don't know what it stands for, but I know it's to start a heart.
True or false? Only trained medical professionals should ever use an AED.
I'm not qualified to answer that question. I don't.
I would say false, because I assume that's why they're there.
They don't have to be a medical professional, but they should read the instructions.
And they're pretty self-explanatory these days, where it walks you through everything step by step.
Do you know where the closest AED might be to us right now?
No idea.
No.
I would hope that there's one somewhere close. I don't know if bars have them.
And I would maybe just try some of the local businesses.
Everyone clear. Press flashing button.
An AED is essentially a little computer with some added-on electrical components.
That is Graham Nickel, a UW Medicine physician and an expert in pre-hospital emergency care.
When we place the monitor from an AED on a person's chest.
Apply pad to bare skin, exactly as shown in the picture.
It analyzes the rhythm and quickly determines whether the person's rhythm is something that would respond to a small electrical shock or not. If it does, it tells the user to charge and deliver the shock. AEDs use computer algorithms, so you cannot fire it when someone does not need it. You can only follow the instructions.
Evaluating heart rhythm.
They're safe, and we also know from prior studies, which were led by physicians and researchers at the university, that when we train laypersons to recognize cardiac arrest and respond to it by getting an AED and putting it on the person and using it, that they will double that person's chance of surviving and going home.
He's not responding. What are you going to tell your buddies to do here?
Call 911.
Perfect.
Get an AED.
There you go.
Among those participating in this free heart screening today is Shane, a three-sport athlete in Shoreline. He's here with his father, and like many of the other young people in attendance, are not quite sure what to expect. Shane has completed his health history questionnaire, had his blood pressure checked by local paramedics, laid down for a 12-lead EKG. Now, the next step? Sit down with UW Medicine's John Drezner and go over the results.
So just looking at your heart health questions that you filled out here, it doesn't look like you're having any trouble. So no heart-related symptoms, no chest pain, ever pass out for any reason, anyone in the family with a heart problem? Excellent, great. Looks like your exam was normal. Let's take a look at your EKG.
A lot of what we do is educate. We educate parents, we educate community groups, we educate doctors on why this is important. But that's where Dr. Drezner and his team have come in, and they've put together this criteria it's referred to as the Seattle criteria, and it's all about how to read EKGs on young athletes.
You know, the EKG to me looks mostly normal. There's one finding on it that I would say is sort of borderline, and I suspect is nothing. But you know, while you're here, what I'd suggest we do is we get an ultrasound of your heart. It just shows a little bit more information. It shows the structure of the heart. You can watch it beat, how big it is, and stuff like that. It's sort of cool to watch, and we can do that here. So why don't we go ahead and just get that as a last step, and then we'll come back up and finish up. Sounds good?
10 minutes later, Shane is back with Dr. Drezner to review the results of the ultrasound.
And you're seen by a cardiologist from the University of Washington, you know, back there when you got your echo, and they put it all together, and they don't think any follow-up is needed and stuff like that. Now, you're only 16 and still playing sports. What I would recommend is you get your heart screened pretty much every year. Certainly every couple years.
Because we tell parents, even if they come to one of our screenings, the kids are cleared to go, because they grow so much during this adolescent period, that they need to be on top of this and check again in 2 years. Now that they know that it's a problem, or that it could be a problem, or that it's something that they need to monitor, they need to stay on top of it also and make sure their kids, be your kid's advocate. Go in and tell your pediatrician that this is something you believe is important.
But today, everything looks great. Awesome.
Tori Sorensen is young, active, fit. Again, not somebody you'd look at and ever presume a heart condition. But as we've learned here today, outward symptoms are not at all a prerequisite for sudden cardiac arrest.
I was playing intramural basketball at Gonzaga University. It was my senior year, and I was running back to play defense, and I collapsed in the middle of the court. Some court monitors who saw me collapse, on my teammates obviously too, they responded immediately and called 911, and another, Carrie, who was my lifesaver, started CPR right away. When the Spokane Fire and medics came, they used an AED, and they shocked me 3 times and rushed me to Sacred Heart. And I was placed in a coma, and they cooled my body. So when my family arrived at the hospital, I was just cold to touch. And that is to prevent further brain damage.
This term, we've heard this term chain of survival used. What does that mean exactly?
Chain of survival is a mental model that individuals developed and promulgated to remind us that to get someone to go home and return to their family, we need to have the first link of early recognition, the second link of calling 911, the third link of good CPR associated with use of a defibrillator, another link of advanced life support or paramedics, and then the last link is post-resuscitation care, which consists of cooling the person's heart and body down to protect the brain when they get to hospital.
I had the same condition as Darla's son, Nick. We both have hypertrophic cardiomyopathy. So last June, I flew back to the Mayo Clinic, and they shaved off part of my heart that was enlarged. So now I'm happy to be running again and, living my active lifestyle.
So what does all this mean for you?
Terrell throws Hank the alley hooper from half court. He catches it and thunder, dunk down, boom.
Well, it's been over 20 years since sudden cardiac arrest took the life of NCAA basketball star Hank Gathers. 20 years to evaluate the whys and the hows. 20 years of research at UW-Medicine and elsewhere to ask whether routine sports physicals are enough, whether we should mandate the placement of AEDs in more public places, especially schools. What other measures should we be considering to prevent tragedies like the ones that cut short the lives of Hank Gathers, Nick Varenti, and very nearly Tori Sorensen?
It's really not to place blame. It's really to look at that case at a time where we knew nothing about cardiac arrest in athletes, learn from it, and understand, man, we can make a huge difference if when we see a collapsed athlete who's unresponsive, we assume it's cardiac arrest. Start chest compressions, call 911, get an AED, and we will save a lot of lives that way. But again, that doesn't change the fact that kids still need a sports physical before they play. And when we do these, we really want to do them well so they can make a difference and prevent those events from ever happening.
After a student collapsed and died at a high school in Linwood this morning, some friends...
During the time it took us to produce this podcast, 2 Puget Sound area high school students collapsed and died during sports and exercise, possibly due to sudden cardiac arrest. So there is a great deal of work still to be done in this area by Nick of Time and in organizations like it across the country.
About 1 in 200 to 1 in 250 students that we screen harbor one of these potentially lethal heart conditions, and that seems like a lot, but it actually is really in line with other statistics from other studies and sort of across the nation. When you look, you will find it. If you don't look and you sort of do the traditional model, you just won't find it.
It's a wonderful way to keep going in Nikki's memory because we're actually preventing kids from dying. We're finding things before something tragic happens, and we're able to send them for follow-up where those conditions can be fixed and they can be monitored so that something tragic doesn't have to happen like happened to our family.
One important note regarding these Nick of Time screenings, they are not meant to replace an annual sports physical.
The Nick of Time Foundation does not do sports physicals. We are not signing off on their forms for medical clearance to play sports. The sports physical includes, other areas not addressed by the Nick of Time: concussion, risk of heat stroke, potential eating disorders, stuff like that. The Nick of Time is focused on heart screens, and so the Nick of Time Foundation is not trying to give you medical clearance to play sports. Obviously, when we find an issue, we start talking about whether or not it's recommended. The University of Washington, if you come see us in our clinic, we can provide either model. We can do your entire sports physical, including an advanced heart screen, or you can come in and just see us for your heart screen.
Finally, despite the overwhelming evidence that AEDs, automatic external defibrillators, save lives, they're only as good as your ability to find one. UW-Medicine's Graham Nickel is preparing to deploy an innovative challenge to create a database of all publicly accessible AEDs in the region, and you can play along.
There are now more than 1 million defibrillators that have been purchased and put into public locations around the country. Unfortunately, we often don't know where those are, and we often do not know whether they're available for use, whether the battery's intact, and so forth. So I am working with colleagues here at the University of Washington and at the University of Pennsylvania to try and identify where the defibrillators are in the city of Seattle. In essence, we're going to hold a crowdsourcing contest or scavenger hunt, encourage people to go out and find them, tell us where they are, and whoever identifies and reports the largest number of devices will get a prize. This has been shown to be a very efficient way of tracking things out in the community that we wanted to know where they are. Someone held what was called a red balloon challenge a few years ago and put 6 big red balloons around the country, and then held a contest to ask people to identify all of them. How long do you think it took to find those red balloons?
I would think a month.
7 hours. So
Wow.
it's much more efficient than us going door to door and knocking on your house and saying, "Pardon me, sir, do you have a defibrillator?"
So suffice to say, we will keep you apprised here on the UW Medicine Pulse as to when that contest takes place. Thank you, Dr. Graham Nickel, and thanks to all of our guests, Dr. Jonathan Drezner, Darla Valenti, Tori Sorensen, and all the physicians, firefighters, and volunteers who worked with us at the Nick of Time Heart Screening up in Shoreline. To find out more about the topics discussed on today's program or to send us feedback, visit our website, uwmedicine.org/pulse. And please subscribe to this podcast on iTunes to get every episode as soon as they are released. UW Medicine Pulse is produced by Tina Knoll, engineered by Shelley Goncharowski. I'm Marty Reamer. Thanks for listening.